Good morning. It's great to be with everybody. And I just want to take a minute in the season of gratitude to express my gratitude for everybody coming back on Take Two. And it's not just returning, but I can't tell you, I was actually overwhelmed by the outpouring of support that we received during our tech mishap a week or two ago. So it really meant a lot to me. And I'm showing up today. You heard in the chat, I'm going to be full speed ahead. And we're going to dive into a pretty robust conversation about this topic of human-centric leadership. And so we'll engage in the chat. So stay active in the chat. We'll get into some conversation and some community knowledge transfer. But I want to preface my commentary. I've got some friends, on the call today, and people know, I've long been a proponent and an advocate, a supporter of the work that HR is doing to make work better. And I truly believe this from the bottom of my heart, that there has never been a better moment in the history of time to be in the practice or in the discipline of HR. It's never been more important. And I'll share a little bit of context on that perspective. A few weeks ago, I was attending a conference, a symposium. I was about 200 people in the room, and there was a panel discussion. And the panel is called What the C-Suite Expects from HR Now. 4 CEOs on the stage, moderator, and the moderator started simply by asking each of the 4 CEOs to take a minute, high level, and just give an overview of their perspective on what's needed from HR. Well, the first 3 CEOs said something we've all probably heard, fairly common. They said, look, we need HR to be a strategic partner to the business. Common refrain, and I think that's accurate. Well, they handed the mic to the 4th CEO, and he said something a little bit different. He said, I respect the perspective of my 3 panelists, but I see it a little bit differently. And what he said was, as the CEO of our organization, we're in a position now where I'm looking to HR leadership to tell me what to do. We're reimagining work. Our people have changed. This is a post-pandemic world, and we're entering unfamiliar territory. And I'm looking for HR to help us change, to lead into the future. And, he said it, and you kind of could hear things get quiet. And then one woman in front of me, she just started clapping. And she was so inspired, she kind of stood up out of her chair. For a moment, it was a solo standing ovation, but in true HR community fashion, pretty soon everybody else was standing on their feet applauding too. And it was the first time really in a symposium where there was a panel discussion that I saw a standing ovation in the first minute. But for me, it was a defining moment. And it reiterated what I think is so true now. And it is true that HR is more valuable today than at any time in previous history. I think our role, the work we're doing, helping our organizations and our leaders see into the future to make work better is an imperative. Now, it does beg the question, why? Why was that on the heart and mind of that CEO? Why does Deloitte research suggest that this is the most important time or a defining moment in HR? Well, I want to shed some light on that. And I'm going to share a data set that I think clearly illustrates the way we're working isn't working. And if you look at the statistics, it's pretty evident. This is the long tail effect of what we've been through over the course of the last 2 years. People are overwhelmed, anxious, distracted, overworked. 70% of leaders feel burned out. You can just put a Y into the chat if you felt that way once or twice over the course of the last 12 months. Now, I want to hold this for just a second, Jeff, because I want to point out the statistic at the bottom. And it's Deloitte research, and I think it's important for everybody to really digest that this morning. That our employees are going to leave. We've heard about the Great Resignation. We've heard about quiet quitting. If work impacts our well-being in a significant way, people are going to opt out. And that shift is new. And I'll tell you where I really began to realize this. We were about a year into the pandemic, and I got a call from a very good customer of mine. It was the COO of Renewal by Andersen. I worked with them for a number of years in Minneapolis. And we were connected. And I said, hey, Jeannie, how are you? How are things going? She said, well, Ryan, the business is performing extraordinarily well. And they were. I mean, they were one of the kinds of businesses that during the pandemic saw a tremendous growth curve. People were at home thinking about, their homes, replacing their windows. So sales were exploding. They were on pace to have a record year. I said, that's extraordinary. She said, well, that's only half the story. She said the other half, the other side of the coin is, we're having a record sales performance. But what it's doing to our people is a disaster. Our people are overwhelmed, stressed, frustrated. She said, we've never had to deal with anything like this before. And she said, I want to get out in front of this now. And what she said to me was really interesting. This is, they're a pretty customer-obsessed company. This is the Renewal by Andersen signature service statement. It's the promise they make to their customers to trust, respect, care for, and delight their customers. What she said to me was, we need to turn this service statement around and start treating our people that way. We need to rebuild trust, demonstrate a deeper level of respect and care and compassion and empathy and understanding. And we need to figure out what it's going to take right now to get back to delighting our employees, to deliver a work experience that truly delights them. And they started investing heavily into this, on really the front side of the curve. And it's paying off now. But what I think she had the foresight to see were some trends that are reimagining the work experience. And I'll share three that I want to anchor us in today before I get into some specific ideas about what to do about it. So three trends that I think are reshaping our relationship to work. And make no mistake, maybe Jeff, come back to me for a quick second before we drop in on the trends. Just a high-level thought. I believe that we are living through a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reorient and reimagine our relationship with work. And it's the people that are on this call this morning that are in the driver's seat. They're going to help their organizations see the future differently, think differently, lead differently, and ultimately organize our people to work differently. So what's shaping this reimagining of work? Well, three big drivers. So let's touch on the trends. One, I think it's really important to understand the future of work as hybrid. That is absolutely and abundantly clear. A lot of discussion and debate. Are we returning to the office or are we not returning to the office? The answer to that question is a resound yes. We're going to return to the office some of the time. We're going to work from home some of the time. Place has evolved. What is abundantly clear is employees today covet the autonomy and the flexibility to work where they see fit. And so that's what's coveted. And you can see, let's go back to the trends, Jeff. You can see when knowledge workers are searching for a new position, that flexibility and autonomy is top of mind. Okay, the second statistic, the future of work is happy. And I think that's a good thing. Why shouldn't work be that way? But it's a paradigm shift. You think about this statistic. 50% of millennials and Gen Zs, so the fastest growing segment of the workforce, would rather be unemployed than unhappy at work. That's a shift. And I can tell you as a Gen X leader, that wasn't the case for me. And I'll tell you what the difference is. I and many people in my generation, probably many people on the call this morning, could identify with this statement. I did this. I organized my life around my career. My career was first, and my life fit in around it. We've seen the inverse happen. Today, we've seen a reset with our priorities, our relationship to time and place, and certainly our relationship to work. And more people increasingly are organizing work around the quality of their life. That's certainly true for these next two generations. So that's a shift. The future of work is happy. And the last point I want to make, the future of work is human. So when we look at quit rates and the Great Resignation and this projection, right, nearly half of the workforce is thinking about leaving their jobs. Why is this happening? Well, look at the two big reasons. People don't feel valued by their organizations or their managers, and they don't feel a sense of belonging to something larger than themselves. Those are issues we have agency over. I think the transition, the reimagining work, if it's anything, it's a leadership crisis, or it is very much a call to make work better. So as HR practitioners, people that are focused on all things people, how can we lead that initiative? And that's where I want to take the rest of the conversation this morning. I'm going to give you some very specific ideas out of our body of work and research that I think can help you think about the doing of making work better. And we're going to build the conversation around 4 insights. And here's the first insight. To be a highly effective HR practitioner today, I think you have to be an agent of change or initiate continuous reinvention. And we have to be in the driver's seat. Traditionally, HR was waiting for direction from the business or reacting to the business. And maybe you didn't resist change, but now we have to be the catalyst for change. We have to initiate change. We have to play offense. We have to challenge the C-suite, the board, and our functional leaders to think differently about the future. It's initiating continuous reinvention. Clearly, where we've been isn't going to work anymore. And again, you look at the data set, the way we're working today isn't working. So we're in a position now where we can initiate change. And we refer to leaders and HR practitioners who think this way and work this way as future makers. And I think what it takes today to be a successful HR leader is you have to have a foot in 2 worlds. You have to have the drive to execute and perform given today's current marketplace reality and competitive landscape. By and large, you are doing that, and I recognize it has not been easy. But simultaneously, you have to maintain the discipline to continue to challenge the business, take intelligent risks. Really what's required is we have to disrupt ourselves, our cultures, right? The way we organize ourselves to accomplish work before the marketplace or the competition does it for us. And you know, as we spend time with future makers, and we're going to meet a couple more, I think Jeannie from Renewal by Anderson definitely qualifies as a future maker. They have a couple of things in common. One of the first things they have in common is they're students, they're learners. And just by the very fact that you were here for a second time, right? You're taking time out of your schedule for an idea and insight. Maybe there's something I could say, or the summit is going to give you a few things you could take back and take action on. So that's the first thing. Leaders are learners. But the second thing is equally as important, and that's having the courage to act on the information or the ideas. Otherwise, it's just an exchange. I think the real value of a summit like this is when you get a few ideas or insights, you have the willingness, the courage to go back and immediately take action on the ideas, because it's the action, it's the challenging the business where the breakthrough actually happens. So let's take a look at what that might look like as it pertains to a future maker making work better. And we're going to look at my first example. And it's an example or a story that I absolutely love. It's the Starbucks story. I think Howard Schultz really epitomizes the essence of a future maker. And he would actually tell you that Starbucks isn't in the coffee and beverage business. He would tell you that Starbucks is squarely rooted in the human connection business. The Starbucks mission is to inspire and nurture the human spirit. And I would suggest, if you are an HR practitioner, you are absolutely firmly entrenched in the human connection business. Now, like a lot of companies, like my company, perhaps like your company, the last couple of years have been very, very challenging to Starbucks from both a business model, an employee engagement, retention, and culture perspective. They were not immune to some of the challenges of the last couple of years. When you think of retail operation going through the pandemic when their stores closed. And what happened, part of what happened was customer behavior, the psychology of their customers changed. You think about a Starbucks today, 75% of their business is transacted through a drive-through or an app. So they have a very different relationship with their customers. But it was creating all kinds of complexity and challenges for their employees. And their employees began to push back. Howard was recognizing this over the course of the last 12 months, that Starbucks was losing his way. So in a real sign of servant leadership, he actually came off the board and assumed responsibilities, the day-to-day operation for Starbucks, as the CEO again, just this year, a few months ago. And it was really interesting as he came back, he acknowledged, he said, look, as a company, we've lost our way. This was his first sort of public appearance or presentation back as the CEO. And he said, but I have a plan. And, I think a lot of investors were on the edge of their seat. Okay, what's the plan? And what he said was brilliant. He said, it has nothing to do with you or the stock price, speaking to investors. He said, what I'm going to do for the next 100 days is spend time with our people. He went on a listening tour. You want to talk about a sign of servant leadership? That's right. He went on a 100-day listening tour where he traveled around the country and went into stores and listened to their partners, their employees. Now, what was the objective of a listening tour? Well, the objective is to learn. And a couple of key things, the outcome of the listening tour. Look, he recognized they had to reinvent Starbucks, not what they do, but how they do it. He recognized we've got to make work better. So the first outcome of the listening tour is make sure people feel seen and heard. He knew they had to rebuild trust and expand the sense of we within the Starbucks community. He also, as the CEO, wanted to learn from the people on the front line that were doing the work. And then he committed to being a true future maker. He said, after we're done listening and learning, we're going to take action. So it's the learning and the action orientation. That's what makes work better. And I think it was a real sign of humility and servant leadership, the way he approached this. And we're on the cusp of doing a little bit of work with Starbucks, so I've got a little preview. I actually want to show you Howard Schultz on his third day back as the CEO of Starbucks in one of his collaboration and listening sessions. Check it out.
I have returned to Starbucks. This is my third official day.
We are traveling the country trying to, with great sensitivity, understand from you, how can we do better?
Oh, I love this.
I actually want to grow in this company.
There's only one other person at my store that has been there since I've been here the last full year.
Sometimes you'll only get 2 days of training.
My responsibility is to make sure my partners are safe.
It's just been like burning my eyes, like looking at this specific one that says customer expectations.
Our store manager did her best to give us that support and recognize us, but other than that, I didn't really feel it or hear it until you said it.
What we say we value and what we do is not lining up. I feel like that kind of encapsulates all of this.
The only thing that really gave me joy in the midst of everything going on outside of work was being that light to people and to drive out the fear with like our love for one another.
The worst thing that could happen today is that you hold back. I'm sure you have concerns, complaints.
Worked at the one store at 200 North, but like every time I go, it was collaboration.
Pretty powerful when people feel seen and heard, and it really gets back to one of my favorite rules of communication, right? Seek first to understand, then be understood. Jeff, can we go back to the slide without, or will it automatically start the video? Okay, beautiful. Let's just hold that up on the screen for a second. I love this question, and I wanted to share it with everybody on the call. You could see on the whiteboard during these collaboration or listening sessions, they're inviting participation, the thinking, the voice of their employees. And this question is an important one for all of us to consider. What can we dream up next to be a different kind of company, and really inviting the voice, the perspective, and the participation of your employees. Now, I said, okay, listening is great. Listening and learning is great. But then you've got to take action. And the subsequent action is something that I want to share with you. So what's the outcome of this 100-day listening tour? Well, it's some decision and commitments. First, they re-examined and then redefined what it means to be a partner. 4 keys. And this really begins to shape the new Starbucks employment value proposition, right? You're going to be compensated fairly so you can focus on your dreams. Second one's really important. You have everything you need to have the best shift every shift. The third one, you're recognized and celebrated for who you are, and you're going to have a hand in co-creating the future of Starbucks. You have a voice, you are heard, and you can make a difference. Why shouldn't work be that way? And I think it can if we're willing to listen and subsequently take action. Now, an employment value proposition is nice, but what does it mean where the rubber meets the road in terms of investment? Well, let's take a look at that. Here's some of the choices Starbucks is making about 2023. Solutions, investment toward impact. 4 keys. And Jeff, let's hold that slide. Yeah, thank you. So wage and recognition innovation, right? They're increasing compensation. Second one's huge. New well-being benefits, so whole commitment or investment into well-being. That's something you have to be thinking about today. Personalized career mobility. Talent today is more mobile. This next generation workforce is more mobile, so they're supporting that. And here's another big one for everybody on this call, investing in store managers and leadership development. I think it is incumbent upon us to prepare leaders and managers for this new world of work. You got to invest in your talent, you got to invest in training, you got to invest in helping your leaders and managers understand what's required to lead effectively in the future. And we're going to drop into that for a second. But Starbucks also knows it's good business sense to do that. Managers who they retain, if a store is managed by somebody who's been there 3 or more years, their weekly sales on average are 14% higher. So investing in management, retaining management, engaging management makes a whole lot of business sense. It's why they do it. Which brings me to the second insight that I want to share today. To be an agent of change, to be a future maker, you have to deliver HR from a position of influence. And I'll hold that slide for a second so you can digest the quote. But I think it speaks to this defining moment, right? We can either evolve and make a significant contribution to the business or be diminished and dispersed. This is sort of that defining moment. It's that opportunity. And influence isn't about tenure or title. It isn't. I think it's about effective two-way communication and then having the courage to meet the moment or step into the moment. And let me give you an example of what I mean about that. So I was a former chief strategy officer of a division of a Fortune 500 company in advertising communications. And as I got into that job as chief strategy officer, we did a sort of an annual functional review. Our senior vice president of human resources at the end of the year, we would just do a business review. He would reach out to me, and really he was inquiring, how HR was doing supporting me in the business. And we did this 4 times. I was in that job 4 years, and it was kind of like Groundhog Day, right? He asked me 2 questions. He would say, hey, how did HR do supporting you in the business last year? And for 4 consecutive years, I would say, fine, everything was good, it was great. Rick, thanks a lot. We were friends. He was a nice guy. And then the second question, is there anything else we could do differently to better support you next year? I was, no, everyone's getting paid, everything's tracked, I feel supported, everything's good. And the reality is that check the box review, it didn't help the business one iota. We did nothing to move the needle on the growth engine or the impact of the business. Now, we both had responsibility for checking the box in that conversation, but what a missed opportunity. I mean, imagine how different the result could have been if he would have called me and challenged me, right? If the conversation would have gone something like this. Hey, Ryan, I want to talk to you about Atlanta. It's our 3rd largest territory, and it's underperformed 3 consecutive years. And as the leader on all things revenue and growth, I know you can't be happy about that. And as the leader on all things people and talent and performance, I'm not happy about that. So hey, why don't you and I put our heads together on this call and come up with a game plan to course correct that underperformance in Atlanta and grow the business. Different question, different conversation. Now look, I'll be honest, and I was younger then. Had he challenged me in that way, my initial reaction may have been to be a little defensive. It certainly would have been different and probably made me a little bit uncomfortable. I mean, after all, Atlanta and revenue, that was my responsibility. So I felt like it was my turf to course correct that. But because we had trust in a relationship, I would have gotten over that pretty quickly, and it would have been an opportunity to evolve in the business. We didn't do that. But what's going to be required going forward as HR practitioners and leaders is stepping into this moment and being a change agent and influencer and having the courage and the conviction to challenge leaders, yes, even the C-suite, yes, even the board, to think differently. Now, Deloitte's done a pretty good job of defining what that means, what it looks like. They're calling it exponential HR, and I think exponential is a great term. And I want to share a short video. I just want to give you a minute of perspective on what exponential HR really means.
The future of HR requires a different kind of professional. It's an exponential HR professional. Okay, what do we mean by exponential HR? It's about moving from an activity world and a process world to a world that's focused on work outcomes, the outcomes that drive productivity. So that means that if we're being exponential as HR professionals, we're spearheading workforce strategy with the business. We're helping the business to better access talent wherever it may come from. And we're curating that human experience, the human experience that makes work real and allows us to be productive and engaged. All right, so we don't flip a light switch on and become exponential HR professionals instantly. There's some work involved. And it requires, first and foremost, reimagining. Reimagining the way work gets done and reimagining how we operate with a new mindset and new culture.
So let's reimagine the way work gets done. Let's reimagine how to make work better. And I think a great place to start is let's reimagine our role as HR leaders and practitioners. And I'll give you an example of a future maker who I think embodies this idea of reimagining work and reimagining the role of HR. A friend of mine, Donna Morris, who was formerly the chief HR officer at Adobe. She now leads the HR function at Walmart. And I'll hold this quote for a second just to drop in on her perspective. This is how she reimagined and sees the future of the function. It truly is answering this question. How do we make the best impact to the business? And it's got to get beyond hiring and paying people. We should be leading the growth, transformation, and innovation of the business. The future role of HR truly is to operate or act like a consultant. And I got to spend some time with her when she was leading HR at Adobe, and sort of her prescription or playbook for doing this was, she said, look, as HR leaders, we've got to be delivering on the fundamentals. So yes, the hiring and paying people, like the core HR requirements, flawlessly. We have to execute those at an A+ level. And then it's incumbent upon us to look around the business and see where are the strategic imperatives, where are the opportunities to truly make work better. And she would attack things. She attacked gender pay parity at Adobe and fixed it. She attacked their vacation policy at Adobe and fixed it. She attacked with deep analysis and data the annual employee review process at Adobe, and she fixed it. She reinvented it. And that's how she sees the role of HR. It's as a strategic consultant, driving change, innovation, and growth to the business. So I wanted to extend an invitation today in the spirit of reimagining HR to make work better and invite everybody on the call just to consider what is an area of opportunity for impact that you could attack in your business. And I think another way to think about